to Connecticut Politics Live. I am Joe Aguiar. And she's Michelle Bohtello. You were slightly muted there for just a second, Michelle.
Okay.
Oh, good. So, candidates hit the campaign trail pretty hard this weekend, drumming up support for, obviously, tomorrow's election. Republican candidate Bob Stefanowski held a rally for change at a construction company called United Concrete in Wallingford, where I used to live. He did that Saturday morning. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie was a special guest and declared his support for Big Bob. Incumbent Democratic Governor Ned Lamont was at rallies in West Hartford, Newington, and East Hartford on Saturday morning. In the afternoon, both candidates went to the state's NAACP conference in Bridgeport, where they answered questions about education, inflation, jobs, the police accountability bill, and teachers.
And according to WTNH.com, reports on what to do, problems at the polling place. Here are some potential voting challenges and ways to overcome them. And I hope you do. I hope listeners, I hope viewers, please don't leave the polling place.
The number one thing is do not leave. You got to get a provisional ballot. So run through some of these scenarios, Michelle, that people could potentially, not that we expect problems, but let's be proactive. Let's be prepared. What do you got?
Absolutely. Let's see. Possibility number one, out of order polling machines. If you're asked to leave because of malfunctioning machines, don't. Instead, ask for a paper ballot. Possibility number two, you're in line and officials announce the polls have closed. If you're in line at the polling location before it closes, don't let them turn you away at closing time. If you haven't voted, especially, you have the legal right to vote under those circumstances. So stay in line and wait to cast your ballot. Very important.
Yeah, they will from time to time tell people like, hey, it's too late. As long as you were in line by 8 o'clock, you are legally entitled to vote. It could be 9 or 9:30, and they have to accommodate you. So make sure you stay in line and make your voice heard.
Absolutely. Possibility number three, you're not on the registered voters list. If you're told you can't vote because your name is not on the voter roster, ask the poll site worker to check again and to check what's called the list of supplemental voters. If they still can't find your name, ask a poll worker to verify that you're at the right location. I've done that before. I've been at the wrong location.
Yeah, Michelle, I live in Wethersfield, and I vote at a church down the road. And there's a second church about a half mile after that. That's the next polling station. And the first year I went to the proper place. The second year I walked in, I went up, and I kind of was looking around, and I'm like, this place it struck me as different. I went up, I gave them my name and address, and they were like, you're up the street. And I was like, yes, thank you. This didn't seem right. And I left. So usually it is something like that. Make sure you just go to the proper place.
Actually, one of my neighbors is someone that helps out every year, and she knows me, and it's great. And as soon as I walked in, she's like, I was like, oh, yes, wrong place. Gotcha.
Not supposed to be here. Yep.
Let's see, possibility number four. Someone claims you shouldn't be allowed to vote. If your voting eligibility remains challenged after ensuring you're at the right polling location, ask to cast a provisional ballot, which is available in every state except Idaho and Minnesota. You can find details about your particular state's provisional ballot rules here, and I will give you the hotline. Again, if you're not given a provisional ballot, call an election hotline for help. Here are 4 hotlines run by members of Nonpartisan Election Protection Coalition. Can't say that 5 times. That can help you. The Connecticut hotline, 1-866-SEEC-INFO, 1-866-733-2463. One more time, 1-866-733-2463. And I just want to add, please vote. It's so important. Yes. I mean, people bled and died so we could vote.
Yeah, and obviously this is the most important election of our lifetime, or so we've been told to believe.
Every year.
Listen, you know, I I hate when they say stuff like that
I
because look,
agree.
every one of these elections is equally important. And if for whatever reason they attempt to stop you, tell you that again, just ask for a provisional ballot. You can fill out your ballot and then they'll figure it out over the next couple of days. They don't obviously certify the election for a few weeks, so your vote will definitely count. But if you don't get a provisional ballot and you go home, you've given up your opportunity to protest. So again, like Michelle said, go out and vote. And it's funny, Michelle. Earlier today, I was doing a live radio broadcast, and Bob Stefanowski called in. And we've been trying to keep the candidates off the phone lines as to not influence the election. And I'm
Yes.
not going to take Bob Stefanowski's call. And so I had him on for a few minutes. He made a quick pitch to the listeners, again, the idea of looking for change in Connecticut, and then thanked me for having him on and having been really fair with him. And I've talked to Lori Devlin a few times.
Mm.
And, my whole thing, Michelle, is I am not trying to push any sort of agenda. I think it's important that when we talk to candidates, that they answer questions and that they don't give you talking points and it's not rhetoric. Generally, when I have them in studio, I'm like, listen, I don't want to rip on your opponent. I mean, obviously you don't like your opponent. And the people that already like you, they don't like them either. So, you're pitching to a broader audience. Like,
Yes.
let's make this about you. And for the most part, everybody did a really nice job. Amy China had a little fun at Rosa DeLauro's expense a few times, but
Yes, with
that's
her
what
Halloween
happens.
costume.
Well, that's what happens when you don't engage, which,
Absolutely.
it's really
Yes.
unfortunate. There
Yes.
were mostly Democrats didn't really seem to want to engage a whole lot in this
And with
election cycle.
neither with debating, they don't seem to want to debate. I mean, Johanna Hayes debated, which is great, but Rosa stayed out, and I don't know who else. I mean, it wasn't easy to get in touch with these already incumbent Democrats who feel like they don't have to work for you and don't feel like they
I
have to,
I interviewed Jamie Stevenson, who's running the 4th congressional
Mhm.
district. I'd reached out to Jim Himes on multiple occasions.
Yes.
He did give her, I believe, 2 debates. But otherwise, he's been kind of lying low. And
He has.
I
I
look,
haven't.
again, whether you think he did a good job or a bad job, and I'm not passing judgment here, but and especially with Rosa DeLauro 17 terms in,
Yes.
it's not your job. Right? You still have to come back and audition for it every 2 years. Come back and give us that
Yeah.
courtesy. So I like Rosa DeLauro. I think she's been incredible for Connecticut, sits on the
Yeah.
House Appropriations Committee. It's one of the most powerful positions you can
She
have
is
in
powerful.
Congress.
Yes.
That does mean something for Connecticut, but you still got to come back. You still got to debate your opponents. I know she was kind of working the neighborhoods like home by home, but you got to speak to everybody. We need to hear from these folks, and
I
it's
agree.
unfortunate it didn't play out that way.
Some humility, stop feeling entitled like you deserve this job. And I think that's kind of where term limits come in too, whether you like them or not. Uh, you know, each time you have to perform at your job. If you're an employee, if you're not performing, if you're not doing what is needed, you know what, you're going to get fired.
Well,
Like
so
you said, I'm sorry, like
Listen,
you said,
Jamie
yeah,
Stevenson, who's the candidate in the 4th congressional district, she's a Republican. She's very moderate. She was the first select woman of Darien. She's a term
yes,
limits person, and she capped
yes,
herself and retired.
yep,
And then got back into it because she felt like, listen, we need to maybe retire Jim Himes,
yep.
and that was her mindset. And again, not to pass judgment on Congressman Himes. It's nice that I think she's a good competitive opponent. He probably wins that race, but
She's a
again,
strong competitor.
right.
Yes,
And it's good. We were really looking for good competitive races. Obviously, George Logan and Johanna Hayes has
hmm,
been a very competitive race.
yes,
I think that's good for democracy.
yes. I agree.
People will say, well, the media likes that. And it's like, no, it means you have 2 good candidates that people are having a hard time deciding over. And
And
it's
what's
pretty
nice is we
split.
have we have some independent candidates too. Some, I don't know about libertarians, but Green Party candidates. We have candidates that want to do good by this country, and do good by their voters. And it's giving voters a choice. This is what democracy stands for. And this is what we need.
And again, that is why this election, like all the ones previous, are the most important of your life, because you never know when it's going to be the last election.
Yes.
So always make sure that your voice is heard. Now, this might be somewhat shocking to hear. I actually have the flu. And I am probably at the tail end of it. I've had it for about a week.
Oh no.
Yeah, no, I'm surviving. I got a flu shot earlier this year, and I'm going to highly suggest to people that you consider getting both the flu vaccine and a COVID booster. Thanksgiving is in 3 weeks, and we're going to be around some of our older relatives or maybe other people who are vulnerable.
Yes.
And so it might be a good idea. And if you're going to do it, you're going to want to do it pretty soon, because these things need a little time, the COVID thing, to kick in a little bit. So they're saying, Michelle, it's going to be a really bad flu season. It's picking up in Connecticut. Obviously, I'm all the proof you need. The CDC estimates so far this season 1.6 million flu illnesses, 13,000 hospitalizations, 730 deaths, including 2 kids.
Oh,
so
really?
We've had a couple of years because of COVID and masks and being locked up that there wasn't flu. There wasn't even really many colds. So you can expect your immune system is down. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention is really encouraging people with the holidays coming that now is a good time.
And you know what? I don't want to be locked in. I don't want to be masked up. I want to be able to hug my relatives and friends. And so I agree with you. Some people may not want to be vaxxed or get the shot, and that's fine. But just think about others sometimes. And maybe if you're not feeling well, then of course, what do they tell you? Stay home.
I had COVID in May and I had the flu last week. And I'll tell you, having been vaccinated and having the flu shot made a big difference. I didn't even realize I had the flu for most of my run with the flu. It wasn't until my daughter got it and got tested today that we realized that what I was dealing with all last week was the flu. So again, you're not going to get hit as hard, and it's for everyone's benefit. Also, I'd like for the record for people to know, I got the Johnson & Johnson 1-shot first time through. And the next day they announced blood clots by the CDC.
My daughter got that. She's a nurse.
Yeah.
She had to, yes.
I'm fine and haven't had any issues at all. And so again, just, I don't want to tell people what to do, but if you are going to do it, you should do it sooner rather than later.
And can I tell you, I had COVID in Christmas time, me and my husband together. So we're stuck in the house, both of us. And I told him, if COVID doesn't kill you, I will. Not done. So yes, either natural immunity or get the shot.
Yep. One or the other. Do it.
You have more news, Joe?
I do. Yeah. This past Saturday was a really cool event in Hamden. It was called Stop the Violence. It was a march down Dixwell Avenue, ended at Amistad High School, and was followed by a rally. Listen, violence is the crime that's really most on the rise, especially here in Connecticut. We've been seeing a lot of it. It was nice. Town leaders and local church members all took part in this rally, live performances, poetry, prayer, a nice community event. It was nice to see people kind of coming together. And again, I think with the mental health crisis that we've been dealing with, we've seen a rash of really violent crime in Connecticut, and nice to see, people pulling together and trying to spread some love.
Yeah, I believe there was a march in Hamden, if I'm not mistaken. Is that what I don't know if you were.
That's the one. Yeah.
That's the one.
Yep.
Okay.
The Stop the Violence. Yeah.
Oh, stop. Okay. It Stop the Violence march. It started at Dixwell Avenue, I believe. Correct.
Yeah.
Ended at the high school. And so organizers tell News 8 the event is meant to raise awareness about violence happening in the community and to create a safer and just environment. Town leaders, local church members also took part in this rally. An event featured live performances, poetry, prayers, and giveaways, just like you mentioned. Do Do you know anything about what happened in Hampden? Was there something in particular that happened in Hampden? It was just a random rally just to stop the violence.
Yeah, no, just a random rally. There's been a lot of stuff going on in Hampden,
Okay.
and obviously in New Haven, there was a shooting of a police officer on Dixwell Avenue. I think it was in the New Haven part of town as
I've
opposed
heard
to
of that.
Hampden. But yeah, that was 6, 7 weeks ago.
Oh,
And I think it was actually the same week as the shooting in Bristol. I think it was that
really?
Monday. Yeah, there
Really?
was the shooting in New Haven. So again, we've been seeing a lot of it. Murder has spiked in Connecticut.
Yes.
Violent crime. We've been seeing a lot of the daytime, where people are carjacking and stuff. And so,
The ambush of those two cops that just punched my gut. I mean, what's happening to the police is horrible, but when I heard about what happened in Bristol for those two police officers, it was just horrendous.
there was also a couple months ago, a Newington police officer was killed responding to a domestic violence
Really?
situation. Yeah. So again, there's been a lot of that, and it's obviously become a pretty big campaign issue. We saw the crime report came out by the Connecticut State Police. It showed it's on a 10-year decline. But again, Michelle, it seems like it's the more violent stuff. Rape is up, domestic violence is up. So
Yes.
I think that's getting people's attention. And I think it's very much tied into the mental health crisis that we're dealing with in Connecticut, for which Governor Ned Lamont and company invested some $200 million. I talked to Susan Bisowitz a couple weeks ago, and I said, I don't know where that money is, but we obviously have a big issue. I hope we can kind of focus in and figure out how to best help people, because it's a little out of control. Nice to see the community of Hampden sort of step up and say enough is enough.
Did the candidate lieutenant governor, did she give you any insight on what's happening and if there will be help for people with mental illnesses?
She talked about the two helplines in Connecticut, 899 and the 211. And,
Okay.
obviously there's always services. And, I talked to the Bridgeport's emergency management director. There are amazing resources out there. The biggest problem, I think, for most people is the going for help thing. It's not easy
Yes.
to admit you need help. So there are
Yes.
programs out there, but it's a matter of,
Yes.
how do these programs get to the people that need it? Because generally those people are kind of scared to pursue that. And to that point, I had talked with Prudence Crandall a few weeks ago, the women's
Yeah.
shelter, and the first time that you call their phone number, it's free and confidential. You call up, you can kind of tell them where you're at if you think you're suffering from domestic violence. I asked this question because I thought it was important. Do you contact 911? They don't on the initial call.
Right. I
So
heard
if
that.
you're in a
Yes.
situation and you're like, this feels abusive,
They
you
try to
can
keep it
call them.
confidential.
You don't have to
Yes.
worry about, it's all confidential, like you just said.
Yes.
But there is help out there. And again, I think they need to do just a better job of making people aware of it and how easy it is to access, because they have spent a lot of money on it and we need it. And I'm concerned that it's not getting to the right people right now.
And it's needed in schools, more social workers. These kids need help. I've worked in the school system. I've seen just the type of children that come from families that they can't go home. They don't want to go home to. They're afraid to go home to. They don't know what to say. They don't know who to turn to. And a lot of kids, these are young children, they, 6th, 7th, 8th graders, that they confide in their teachers. They confided in me. And there's only so much we can do. And so we need help in schools, these public schools. And it has to start there. It has to start with the young children, because it's an epidemic right now.
Yeah, it definitely is. The National Gun Rights Group that's suing Connecticut to get rid of Connecticut's assault weapons is now asking a judge to repeal that law immediately. The National Association for Gun Rights filed a federal lawsuit back in September seeking to get rid of a ban on assault weapons in the state. Earlier on Friday, they filed what's called a preliminary injunction asking the judge to immediately stop the state from enforcing the assault weapons ban while the case is ongoing. Of course, after the shooting at Sandy Hook, state lawmakers passed some of the toughest laws in the country, which includes a ban on assault weapons. Governor Lamont also recently, Michelle, floated the idea of the weapons that were grandfathered in
Oh, yes.
to ungrandfather them. And there's definitely been some pushback, as you could imagine, on that.
And there's also been an interesting gambit of candidates being voted on election day tomorrow throughout the whole country. I mean, we have ex-football stars, CEOs, TV celebrity doctors. We have an interesting. It's an interesting.
It is no doubt a cast of characters. Obviously, some of the people you're alluding to, Herschel Walker,
Yes.
who I have to say, in all of my years following politics, he's possibly the worst. I can't even believe that guy's going to get votes, but it just to me shows, how partisan we are in this country, where, if the person on the ballot is your party, you're just going to vote.
Oh, it's
You could look at Pennsylvania too. I was talking to someone earlier today who was
Mm.
talking about Fetterman and obviously after the stroke. Is that really the guy that you want to represent you? Do you feel like that's how best you're going to be represented? Should they have maybe replaced him on that ballot?
Yeah.
There's a lot to think about when it comes to that. And also, Michelle, a lot of this is obviously a reflection of Donald Trump. This election will kind of show what sort of influence and sway he still
Yes,
holds over the
absolutely.
Republican Party. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm not a big fan of Dr. Oz, but yes, between him and Fetterman, I mean, I feel bad for the guy. He needs to recover from the stroke and take some time. It's the same thing almost with what Joe Biden's family is doing to him. It's sad, actually, and we have to think about these are people running our country. We have foreign entities who want to hurt us. We need sharp. We need make sure people are all there. Put it that way.
Well, it's funny. Democrats are referring to it as sort of a generational change, or I forget exactly the terminology, but a nice way of saying we need to get younger. And then, listen, the young people are the future of America. It would be nice to see some solid candidates in their 30s or 40s.
There are quite a bit of millennials actually
Yeah.
running. Ohio, I believe, and I don't remember the other states, but there are quite a bit, and it's good. People are getting involved. That's the whole point. That's democracy. Get involved. You want change. What they say? You want change? Run for office. Although they don't make it easy, but it's interesting about Democrats. Excuse me.
Yeah.
They've focused on Dobbs' decision, the Roe v. Wade. And they wanted that to be the top issue in this. They pushed it, and I think they pushed it too far. And unfortunately, I think so. Their way of their talking points, if you will, about abortion, just really, I think people just turned them off, and so Republicans really kind of countered it with the economy. And I think so, and that's the number one issue right now. People are just focused on the economy and what's happening. And that said, there's been a lot of early voting, though. So we'll see if Roe v. Wade really had some impact.
Yeah. You know what the most interesting thing was? Really from June to like the middle of August, that they really seemed to be able to boil this down to that issue. And it was pretty effective.
Yes.
As inflation continued to increase and as gas prices climbed, it became a less important issue to the point where independent female voters were siding with Democrats into September, plus 14. That number currently sits at a plus 18 for Republicans. It's a 32-point swing.
That's right.
And most of the women who were interviewed in the piece talked about how, they're very pro-choice, and all things considered, in a better economic state, that would have been a more important issue. That would have been their driving force. But it seems people are very concerned, especially people here, even in the Northeast. We're expecting a pretty rough winter. There's already talk of oil shortages and utility increases. And so obviously people are very nervous about that. And, it's where we are.
It's good for the Republicans because usually women are the deciding vote. I think. I think there's a lot more women in this country. And I think they do decide the vote usually. And turning to Connecticut, if you will, let's see. We have all 5 of the state's congressional districts. They're on the ballot, along with a high-profile contest for governor, of course, the U.S. Senate, and statewide candidates for constitutional office, and dozens of General Assembly seats. So this is it, like you said, like they say all the time, it's the most important election. We need to go vote.
You know, the funny thing is the WTNH Emerson College poll showed Bob Stefanowski down 13.
I saw that.
It also had Blumenthal leading Leora Levy by 17. And the Stefanowski and Levy campaigns completely rejected the polls out of hand. Talked to both of them. They said internal polling shows it single digits on both sides. But the second the poll came out showing George Logan was up a single point over Johanna Hayes, all of a sudden that poll became the gold standard of polls.
Yes.
And they were very happy to trump that out, which I think kind of goes to show, you know, Michelle, it's important. And we will share polls often with people. It's kind of a snapshot of how people were feeling a month ago. Right. By the time they tally up and get these polls out, it's 3 to 4 weeks later. And a lot can change between now and then. They're also just polls. So if you have a 70-30 lead, it does mean that there's a 30% chance you're going to lose. And I think people kind of forget that. And you see like a wide margin and you just assume, well, that guy's going to win. Doesn't mean that. It just means that's what the polling is. But if people don't come out for whatever reason, maybe it rains, maybe it snows, maybe it's hot, as happened this past August when Connecticut held its primary. We had very low turnout.
That's true.
So these are polls. They're estimations. But even if you're down 90 to 10, there's a 10% chance that you're going to pull off a miracle. And so I think people need to look at polls in kind of a different way and realize that it's a snapshot in time. It's how people were feeling a few weeks ago. It doesn't necessarily reflect what's going to happen on election day, but it's fun, right? It's fun to sort of track these and kind of figure out where things are going. It also, I think, helps the campaigns. Michelle, you're obviously a campaign manager for Dr. Amy Chai.
Yes.
So when you see polls and it sort of tells you the pulse of what people are feeling or what issues are important to them, it'll help a campaign to change their messaging.
Well, this is also true for the need for voters to get in touch with these candidates, not just vote party line, not just vote Republican, Democrat. People need to know what the candidates stand for. Did they look, if they were in office before, what's their voting record? What, did you look at speeches, how they spoke? What's about these candidates that you like, and will they change this country? Will they get this country back? Will they work for you? Will they work for me? And that's the whole point. We pay them to work for us. So we need to vote according to our needs and what we want. And so, I was a candidate. I went from that to being a campaign manager. And, I learned about Amy before I became her campaign manager. I learned about what she can do. She's a smart lady. She can do a lot for this country. And this is what I want. This is what we need in this country. So just vet, we have to start learning how to vet our candidates. People just vote again. Oh, I'm going to vote Republican because the economy, or I'm going to vote Democrat because of abortion. That's not the right answer. The answer is to focus on the candidates, see what they stand for, see if they'll work for you. Call them up, meet them, ask, say, I want to talk to you. I need to know what you stand for. And they should give you time. If they don't, then something's wrong.
Yeah, it's so important that, you really get to know the candidates that you're voting for. And again, without trying to tell anybody how to vote, just make sure that the person that you're voting for, that they support the things that are important to you and that their values align with your values. The 5th district is such an interesting district, and it has become national news. $12 million in outside spending has gone into that election. And you can tell because the ads have gotten nastier.
Yes, and I'm sure people are so sick of ads and text and emails, and I know I am.
I get like 10, 15 texts a
Oh,
day,
I
and
get about
it's
50, so yeah.
yeah, it's yeah, that's what I guess that's life of being a campaign manager. All right, now we're going to switch up some gears. We have a special guest joining us tonight. He is a fashion and media event producer, Faces of Beauty model team manager. He's also an activist, a really good guy, and a photographer. Wayne Winston, thank you so much for joining us on Connecticut Politics TV. How are you?
Well, happy to be here, my friend. I hope everything's okay. I was getting a little lag earlier, so if you guys can hear me, then I guess I'm okay.
Can hear you
Good to
well.
go.
Nice to meet you, Wayne.
And you also, Michelle. You also. So you guys.
Wayne, let's talk about how you got into advocacy work, because it's so important today, and I think highlighting different issues, it can be very contentious in this country for whatever reason. Talk about how you got into that work, and sort of, what you're most currently working on right now.
Well, there's two things. One, you have to really like people for any of this kind of stuff, okay? Because if you don't, it's the wrong business for you, no matter what you're going to do, because there's a lot that goes on with that. I have friends who are Republicans, Democrats, and everything in the middle. And I was a former vice president of the NAACP. I served on about every committee that they have on it. I also work with the state. I'm also part of Reverend Jackson's team in New York. But I'm a Connecticut guy. I've been very active in politics all the way back to, Congressman Himes getting elected, his first go around. And also with Senator Blumenthal when he first left from Attorney General. So as a community organizer before that became popular to turn it one way or the other, I was already that guy, when most politicians run, especially around the Bridgeport way, where I grew up at, there's usually a couple people in everyone's city that are the people to know for that given community, whether you're Greek or Italian, or whatever else. There's a couple of us in Bridgeport, and I'm honored to be one of those people. The fashion industry thing was a whole other thing. That was a hobby that turned into an event that turned into making me a photographer for a fashion week. So that's the fun part of what I do. And we just did, fashion week. We did one in Rockland County Saturday, as a matter of fact. And that's Rockland Fashion Week. And this designer has a dress in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She's an amazing woman, Hope Wade. So I guess the final piece is that I'm also on the board of the Harriet Tubman Learning Center in Powder Springs, Georgia, even though I live here in Connecticut. So when the board meets, we're very interested in what happens across the country, not just in Connecticut. And I think this is a very important election, even though, the presidential election is coming. To me, this is what kind of country do you want election? Right. And it's really, without all this spin, without all that extra, that's what it wants to be. And that's what it really is. So it's interesting that each one goes, this is the most important election that we've ever had. It seemed like there's always a bar that comes, like, by the time the next 2 years or 4 years to come, that force that to happen. So that's basically where we are from my perspective at this moment. So what's going to happen on Tuesday, I think, is very important for our states.
Definitely.
Wayne, I saw you had posted on social media, and I one of the, obviously we know institutional racism in America exists. I know some people are opposed to that idea, and I think those people are just being obtuse to the statistics. You recently came across something about Black people being falsely accused of serious crimes at a really high rate, which doesn't shock anybody.
Yeah, there's two things that happen. One, America's the greatest country on the planet.
Yes.
And just like in your families, somebody does something wrong and you kind of don't want to talk about it. I mean, to me, America's like, we are the family of America, and there's things we want to talk about and things that we don't. The grandmother chained up in the basement is that even though we created a great country with the greatest constitution on the face of the earth, which France copied itself, they still made an amendment that excluded Black people from the exact same opportunities. So that amendment, which basically literally said we are counted as slaves and cattle at the beginning of this country, our white counterparts did not have those limitations. So that kind of falls into a generational wealth. So you guys have had, white Americans have had opportunities for generational wealth, whether they got rich or they just regular working people. Those impedances were not there that said, don't hire a black person. You're going to only clean for someone else. They don't have to pay you a fair wage. Heck, we didn't get the right to vote, all of us, until 65. And then Dr. King is killed in 68. And think how powerful this is. He was killed just for getting us a right to vote.
Right.
So that's why extremism isn't gone. And that's why it's dangerous. And, black people and even Jewish people, they're like the canaries in the coal mine. It's a part that's difficult to really wrap our minds around. I mean, as a country. And sometimes we have some people who are like really out there to go like, hey, there's no good white people. Look, that's absolute lie. And I'll say this right here. And I say this in the things I go to, just like all black people aren't perfect. All white people aren't either. But there are some groups that have risen to the top, in the Oath Keepers, those guys aren't Boy Scouts. They're not selling cookies or any of that kind of stuff. Neither are the neo-Nazis. I mean, they're here to make a statement. And we saw it in Virginia where a young white girl got killed for no reason other than they wanted to show that they have a voice and they want to be counted. And so that's pretty frightening in 2022. But there's still the part where if we can get a handle on that, it changes our politics.
Wayne,
go ahead.
Do you think this issue has been politicized, overly politicized? Do you think we should have candidates who are really focused? Do you think there are candidates that are really focused to change? Do you think, or is it politics, butting heads and talking points?
I think there's two things, Michelle. And one is, if you have a group that is straight white supremacists like the Klan, and they're supporting somebody, for me, that's a problem. Right. Now some people can find, well, what they believe in, they're against abortion or great. Okay. But what is the real core of what it is that you do? And they have histories of these things when it comes to black people in particular. So when you have, and this is my word, Republican Party, and I have this with my Republican friends, if you're not shouting out these crazy people, I mean, how can you really say that you want the wide berth of people of color on board when they stand for the things that are exactly the opposite? There's a lot of extremists that have taken over to the right. Yeah. And I remember when President Obama got elected and the crazies got out there. They're like, wait a minute, they have a black president. A lot of people didn't like black Obama. Hey, he's not my president. It's called a monkey, a gorilla. The whole time he's there, they go after Michelle, and they never accepted it. So when Donald comes in, for these guys, like, hey, this is our time. Whether you love him, whether you hate him, Donald had no problem saying he's a racist and his dad, Right. So for us, we're standing going like, wow, this is crazy. How are we going to have a country where the president is like, hey,
division.
And then he brings in Steve Bannon, who does Breitbart News, which historically for 20 years they had Mein Kampf, all of this crazy stuff on the site, and he's going to be the chief of staff. I'm like, then I go like, well, let's see what happens. What do you think was going to happen? So I think there's good things, that Donald wanted to do. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of things that overshadow him because you cannot have extreme racists over there and think it's not going to have an impact, especially when they're helping with policy. So that's why black people are saying, if you want my vote, you at least have to show that you have people that are interested in our cause in large cities. That's why we swing Republican. Like I vote for a Democrat. I vote for Chris Jay's. I don't know how many times.
Yeah.
But this is where we are. And I think Republicans, if they're not shouting these guys out or trying to oust them, it's going to continue to be difficult because that's the association right now that is going on. And I'm all for any candidate that's moderate, that treats us all well with respect and love and support. I'm totally with that.
Of course.
So
I remember
in
2008, after Obama got elected, and I had been a lifelong Republican to that point. Really loved John McCain. I thought he was just a great American.
Oh my God, yes.
His concession speech that night, to me, is one of the greatest speeches of the 21st century. And I mean, it kind of changed the way I felt about things. It was that powerful. And yes. I thought that night we were moving into a post-racial America. I really did. And what I saw over the next 4 years was a lot of the dog whistling with Mitt Romney from the, no one's going to question my birth certificate. The second Trump came off that escalator talking about Mexicans, rapists, and murderers, I was like, peace. We're not even hiding it anymore. Yeah. And that, the party of Lincoln, that brought me great shame. And I had to step out because, like you said, they weren't even hiding it anymore.
Yeah.
And this guy came into a situation where Donald Trump didn't start this.
No.
Right.
No,
it was already smoldering. Donald Trump walked in there wearing a gasoline suit. Yeah. With flamethrowers in his hands, and it has been so insane to see how many people have sort of fallen in line with that. And again, where I thought in 2008, like, oh, look at us, little progress, like we can do this. It has been, and it seems to me, Wayne, you go back to women's rights, obviously, the civil rights movement. You mentioned Dr. King being killed for getting Black people the right to vote. There's always resistance. And it seems like we're going through that bit of resistance where 20 years from now, we probably look back on this like, wow, I can't believe we survived it.
Well, McCain, he's the last of those types of Republicans. I mean, there's so many of the extremists that have taken over. Because when President Obama got elected through the Tea Party, and I'm sure you probably remember this as well, Michelle, that when he gets elected, the fringe people came out and they were like, well, we want someone. Oh, we're moderate? No moderates. This is our time. We have to get these people to the point where the regular Republicans, the moderates and the conservative traditionals like the McCains said, I'm not even going to run, which was bad because it left an opening for them to come in. Right. I got family down in West Virginia, and they were like, Wayne, listen, for this election, and please, the hillbillies, the people, the mountain people, he says they're coming to town voting, and they never come out. So we were going into a shift from a Obama type of thing, and God knows he wasn't perfect, no president is, over to the other side. It says this is our time, and I'm very worried about where we are when we have such intolerance for people of color, because it's not so much that it's a race card. It is understand that these guys want a race war, and they've said it. When you have an organization that says we're waiting to kick off the race war, should we just go, well, let's see what happens? Well, January 6th happened. Some people are real pissed off. They're being prosecuted. And then the election thing is like, my God, if we can't trust our system, how can I trust your candidate, to win? Or
by the way, for the record, I hear a lot of people say, I'll care about January 6th when they start arresting people for the BLM riots. And to that, I say, look it up. There have been over 1,400 arrests associated with the BLM marches. So people who broke and burned stuff are paying. And the people who broke into our nation's capital will pay the same, a greater price, because that's our nation's capital. That is the beacon of democracy on earth. Yes. And for that to have been tarnished like that by people who certainly feel a certain way and support one very specific person, which brings me to the other thing with Election Day tomorrow. Do you guys realize only one person claims that his election results were tainted? Nobody else. I mean, if the Democrats wanted to really make a difference, they would have taken out Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham and a lot of those other guys that won re-election 2 years ago. So that's either the worst plan in the history of plans by the Democrats or Donald Trump's full of it.
Well, yeah. I think you had the second one there.
I'll take option number 2. There you go.
Because, man, you from the Democratic side, strategy-wise, okay, what the Democrats fail at, their messaging is horrible. We've been struggling with that forever. I mean, the Republicans, they says, okay, we're going to talk about goats. They'll go on a show. They'll talk about goats. You can talk to them about trees, earthquakes. They go right back to goats. That's the line, the total line. To a fault almost, Democrats, we got a big tent. And so we got to get everybody under that tent. So what we're going to talk about now is all these other things, which is good. But at the same time, the messaging, like we were talking about earlier, you guys were talking, it's like the messaging, it becomes real. When you tell somebody something long enough, people start to believe it. I mean, a conspiracy theory that in Washington, there's a pizza parlor where Joe Biden and President Obama and these other people are in the basement and they're sex trafficking children. How insane is that? But people believe it and they post
Wayne, don't you feel bad for the guy who showed up with the gun thinking no one's doing anything about this? It's all over my news feed, and I gotta save those kids. And that guy goes and right, there's not even a basement in the pizzeria, like jokes on him. And what do the politicians do? Oh, well, this is getting out of hand. And it's like, well, what do you think made that guy do that? Was it possibly the dangerous rhetoric that you're throwing out there?
And what's not conspiracy is that there is human trafficking happening at our border. Yes. And this is where we really need to focus. And it doesn't seem like any politician, any candidate wants to focus there. It's sad. It's scary. These kids, I actually know personally a woman who was human trafficked, and the stories are horrendous. We need people to do things. We need people to go there. We need candidates who care. And the whole thing, I'm not condoning anyone at the Capitol or BLM, what have you, but these are voters who feel disenfranchised. So
why do they feel disenfranchised?
Exactly.
They feel disenfranchised because the politicians are telling them nonsensical things.
That's right.
And they're pitting people against each other.
Exactly.
And that kind of rhetoric is very dangerous. I was talking to Bob Stefanowski, the Republican candidate for governor. There's an ad running where he calls Democrats like pro-criminal. And I said, Mr. Stefanowski, like, do you honestly feel that way? You think Ned Lamont is putting criminals' rights ahead of, I mean, that's an insane accusation to make. He can say that on television. He wouldn't own it. He blamed it on a PAC when I spoke to him. But, Wayne, that kind of rhetoric is dangerous, and that's what gets people killed.
So to your answer, okay, because I'm a guy, I'm always going to talk to the realism of things. The strategy is there are insecurities that we have in this country about race, and black people, black males in particular, people see as scary. It is. I've had my own experience in an elevator. Dressed in a suit going to work, and there's an older white woman next to me. She's kind of, when I get in, she goes, I'm like, I don't know from anywhere. I mean, being stopped is, every black man I know has been stopped. The fact that we have to give our children the talk, our male children, if the police pull you over, keep your hands on the wheel. Don't do anything that will make them think that you're trying to do something. Our white counterparts don't have to do that. I could never say, listen, I pay your salary. I'll pay your salary. And, I'd be arrested because they're not going to accept that from me. People like me, and then I'd be going to jail, and then they're going to say, yeah, he was this and he was that and other charges, and then I got to deal with that. Now, is that all police officers? No. But the fact is, if you have 100 and there's 2 of them like that, they affect thousands of lives within the time that they're there. So I love the police. I support the police. I have in my family. I'm just giving you this perspective that when you're dealing with the black community, this is what's going on for them. So the Black Lives Matters thing, where we look at what happened in Massachusetts and they spent some money over here.
Yeah.
Black Lives Matters is not a national organization cartel that's going out across the country. You have white families and they have Black Lives Matters signs in the yard. They organized in Fairfield and in Westport and all across this state because they knew something was wrong. So you can't just, say, look at it, they burnt this or set this on fire. And it's like people are frustrated. And what we have in comparison, BLM, by the way, started with Trayvon Martin. It didn't start here. It started years back with Trayvon Martin, because Trayvon Martin, it was like, how's this kid going to be killed? And you heard it later on in New York, when they get, oh my God, I can't believe this name. Oh my God.
Zimmerman.
Okay. Yeah, that was Zimmerman. But in New York, when you have the big guy gets choked.
Oh, Eric Garner.
Eric Garner. I'm sorry.
Eric Garner.
Sorry, Mr. Garner, because I know the family.
Yep.
They jump on him and choke him to death for selling loose cigarettes. Who does that? How does that happen? So that became, again, Black Lives Matters, and that became I Can't Breathe. So then by the time you get to George Floyd, they're already marching for years, Black Lives Matter, just to say, listen, treat us like you treat your friends, your own family. When you see my son, think of him as your son. Compassion. We know jail time is disproportionate. Every statistic shows it. So that's when we get to BLM and you go, listen, those people took money over there. And so that's why I see BLM is no good. It's terrible for the country. That's crazy rhetoric, because it hurts our ability to work together when they come that way. So we have people that are taking these things, and it's not just the political parties, but their own self-interest parties. And I'll go back over to extremists who are very smart at getting their name out. And it feels warm and fuzzy. When Richard Spencer started the alt-right in 2008, he said, we need a voice that's different than the McCains, that's different than the conservatives. And he literally said, that's what the alt-right is going to be. And he brought in young people. So these aren't even old people.
Yeah.
Right. Ooh.
Looks like a little bit of a connection problem there for Wayne.
It's
interesting. It's interesting because, and I think you and I talked about this recently, Michelle, that I feel like the moment where things really went sort of extremely divisive in this country was, Wayne was just talking about Trayvon Martin, who was killed by George Zimmerman. And that seemed like the first time where Americans took sides.
Yeah.
On murder.
I know.
And I thought, oh my God, like now it's like he deserves it. Like, whoa, that to me seemed like that moment in where I kind of look at like, where did we go wrong in America? Because every shooting after that, every death where, again, BLM ended up showing up, it was like people were taking sides on people being murdered. And I thought, this is not good for society at all.
Well, I blame politicians who are in office. I blame whoever was in office at the time, because they're the ones. The whole point is for them to keep this country safe, to keep this country united, to keep this country going, working, community, what have you. So that's where I come in with that. I don't know if Wayne is able to come back.
Wayne, you back? All right, he still seems like he's having.
Amy and I, we've been working. Amy, the candidate for the 3rd district, she worked with BLM, the local chapter in the New Haven area, and they're doing great work. They're trying to get backpacks for the kids and get them started for school and get them what they need. So yeah, it's you're right. It's the rhetoric.
I think people would also like to know that BLM also comes out and protests when white people are shot by the police. I don't think most people know that their whole thing is police brutality. And Michelle, I've always found it interesting. People who believe all lives matter, right? As if this is Black Lives Only Matter, which it's certainly not what it is meant to suggest or imply. It's as in Black Lives Matter too. they didn't put the 2 on at the end, and because that was the whole idea. As Wayne was saying, if you look at some of the shootings, like in the case of Philando Castile, who was following orders, was carrying a gun, was literally gave them his gun permit that he was licensed to carry it. He was shot in the car with his daughter inches away from him in the back seat.
Ooh.
When Jacob Blake was shot in the back, his 3 sons were in the car. They shot him 7 times in the back. And it just seems to me that sometimes when it comes to black children, police kind of have no regard for those children. And that kind of stands out to me sometimes. And again, as far as the idea that all lives matter, when I hear, police shoot more white people every year, and I think, well, that's not a good argument either, right? The police shouldn't be shooting people during routine traffic stops. Like, we certainly don't want that to be the case.
Well, that's exactly right. We got to give police a little bit. I'm sure, if maybe they weren't following directions right away, maybe they weren't, doing what they were asking. So, there's a lot to it. I don't know the full story, but I'd like to see both sides of that.
Yeah, I think every one of these cases is a little bit different and unique. Again, I think the police have the hardest job on the planet. There's not a harder job, and the standard for being a policeman is very high.
Mm-hmm.
And
you're not paid very well either.
Wayne sort of said too, I mean, if you have 100 good cops and there's 2 bad ones, think about the thousands of people who they affect.
That's right.
Right? Like Wayne, you're back now. Yes.
Well, maybe he's trying. No, I don't see him.
All right.
Anyway,
that was a wonderful conversation with
that
Wayne.
was great. And yes, the police have a hard job, and we need to, you know what, too, I think just starting as young kids, we need to start teaching respect and authority, and there are consequences to actions.
Well, I'll tell you, I would take that a step further, Michelle. I think in general, respect is missing from this country for our elders, for each other, for people of different races and religions and creeds and colors and whatever. I think if people just gave everyone else the respect that they expect back, I don't think we would have the issues that we have. I mean, you look at kids that get bullied in school, again, it's who's not teaching that kid at home how to be respectful to other people.
Exactly.
It's really sad. But I think if we could sort of get beyond that and learn how to respect ourselves and each other again, I think it'll go a long way in this country.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's just a sense of feeling like kids belong, giving them a sense of community and dignity and showing that, that we care. We all should care for each other. Absolutely, Joe.
Yeah. Well, again, so tomorrow is the election. Polls open at 6 a.m. They will be open until 8. As Michelle and I said earlier, if you're in line at 7:45 and 8 o'clock comes and you're still in line and they're like, all right, everybody head out. Don't head out.
No.
You tell them you're going to cast your vote. And if it's 9:15 or 9:30, you're going to do it. They have to work late anyway. So make sure you do. Again, if for any reason there's a voter issue, there are, you have that, we want to pull that phone number up one more time. Again, if for some reason they don't want you to vote, ask for a provisional ballot. And then the ballot's filled out, and then they'll deal with that over the course of the next few days as they certify the election count. So, you know what? Let's bring Wayne back. We only got about a minute left. Wayne, we appreciate it. Michelle and I continued on with the conversation. You brought up some really great points.
Yeah.
Let me give you just take a final thought on tomorrow.
It's so important that people get out, not just have an opinion. People who are upset are the best voters because they're going to get to the polls. They let nothing stop them.
They won't
Sometimes
change.
we feel a certain way. And we go, this is horrible. But then we don't go and our votes aren't counted. And that happens too many times. And that's why it's hard for change.
That's right. That's great. That's a great last point. I'm just going to give you the number again. So for the hotline, the provisional ballot hotline. So 1-866-SEEC info or 1-866-733-2463. And as Wayne said, please go out and vote.
Most
Thank
important
you, Wayne.
election of our lives. We're certain of that.
Yes.
Wayne Winston, please keep up all the great work that you're doing in the community. We'll definitely
Yeah,
want to have you
absolutely.
back again soon. Catch you up on what you are up to. We really appreciate your time. Is there a website where people can check you out?
Well, yes, I do have the Anti-Racism Coalition. That's on Facebook. It's a group that keeps you up with what's going on because that's big for me in our community. I'm also on Instagram under Wayne Winston. And I'm on the radio every Wednesday, WICC, from 11:30 to 12 to talk about a lot of these issues. And I appreciate you guys very much, Michelle. And Amy is awesome. Okay.
Oh, she
Amy
is,
is awesome.
yes.
And Joe, thank you so much, man. I mean, if we continue to do this, we just might make things.
Make some history here.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot.
Absolutely.
All right, Wayne Winston, everybody. That's going to do it for Connecticut Politics Live. I am Joe Aguiar for Michelle Bohtello. We'll see you tomorrow night at 5 o'clock right here on Connecticut Politics TV.